I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Maryland, like many other states, has announced goals to reduce fossil fuel use. A significant number of homes and buildings in the state, as they are across the nation, are connected to natural gas supplied by utility companies using underground pipelines. These homes and buildings have to be electrified for the state to meet its climate goals. That is, the natural gas network must be dismantled. But we are, in fact, building out new natural gas infrastructure, adding new homes and buildings, following a pipeline replacement and maintenance schedule that is intended to keep natural gas in play indefinitely. Gas utility companies, which are regulated in Maryland, are guaranteed a rate of return based on something called their rate base, which is the total value of all infrastructure, pipelines, pumping stations, reservoirs, they have built in order to provide the service that is asked of them. This means that the utilities have an incentive to grow their assets in order to expand their income, despite the state having goals of cutting fossil fuels. This is really an untenable situation, and I asked David Lapp, Maryland's People's Counsel, an office established to advocate for the state's utility consumers, about a petition his office filed with the Public Service Commission, Maryland's utilities regulator, asking for this system to be rationalized. Listen closely. Utility law and policy is complex, to put it mildly. This episode also includes the third in a new segment on the podcast: student reviews of books contested by mostly conservative religious families and groups for their gay and trans themes, and previously for Black and ethnic history themes. This week's book is called Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the one and only Seth Keibel, a longtime Baltimore area local musician and one of the earliest supporters of I Hate Politics podcast. The songs used in this episode are from his compositions from the album Clown with a Stick. Harry Appleman on piano, Jeff Reed on double bass, Joey Antico on drums, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Hi, Tula.
Hi.
What book are we reviewing today?
Today we're reviewing Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake.
Who are the main characters in the book?
The main characters are Ivy Aberdeen, a young girl of 12 who loves art and is unsure about her sexuality. Taryn, Ivy's best friend, someone that Ivy has trouble connecting with at times after her little brothers were born, and ever since Taryn has started talking about boys. And June Somerset, Ivy's crush. June and Ivy become best friends along with Taryn after the storm.
Did you notice any stereotypes and oversimplified generalization about a group in the book?
I didn't notice any prominent stereotypes in this book. Overall, the writer seemed to be pretty good at staying inclusive and not putting any offensive stereotypes.
Okay, so how did the book start?
The story starts with Ivy in bed in the middle of the night during a huge storm, drawing in her notebook filled with art of girls holding hands. The storm quickly turns into a tornado. Alarms go off, and her family of 6 is awakened. They manage to get to their storm shelter just in time, Ivy injuring her ankle on the way down, only to find that their house has been destroyed, leaving Ivy and her family devastated. All that Ivy was able to bring out of her house was her pillow and notebook. A local doctor and her daughter come to check on the Aberdeens, and Ivy's new little twin brothers, Aaron and Evan. Dr. Somerset's daughter, June Somerset, is in Ivy's class. They know each other vaguely, but this is where their friendship begins.
What happens next?
Ivy's family goes to a local elementary school, which is being temporarily used as a shelter for families like Ivy's. Ivy and June become good friends that night. Ivy teaches June how to draw a few things, and they are able to bond. But coming back to her family, she realizes that she has lost her notebook, which is a huge deal for her. She searches and searches, but can't seem to find it. The family decides to go to Calliope Inn, run by a woman named Robin, who openly dated another woman, and is someone that Ivy builds a really strong bond with. Once Ivy returns to school, she starts to get pages of her notebook back, along with notes in her locker. Ivy begins to confide in the person leaving her notes. Later in the book, she calls the person leaving the notes in her locker Keeper, as the keeper of her secrets. She is also hanging out with June Somerset more and more, developing what she thinks is the beginnings of a crush. Ivy hopes that Keeper is actually June. She also notices that June's mother is very overprotective of her. Ivy talks about her sexuality multiple times with Robin, who understands her better than anyone else in her life, as Robin, as I said, openly dates other women.
How does the story end?
The story ends with the day of the dance, which is also Ivy's 13th birthday, and it breaks her heart when her mom forgets to call her at Taryn's house to tell her happy birthday. At the dance, June talks about dancing with a boy, and it really hurts Ivy. Still, she agrees to stay the night with Taryn at June's place. June had cancer when she was 8, and the sleepover was partially to celebrate how far she had come from then. At June's house, Ivy comes out to Taryn and June by showing them Ivy's drawings of her holding hands with June. June is stunned and sad, and Taryn tells Ivy that she is the keeper, the one who had Ivy's notebook all along and was showing her the notes in her locker. Ivy leaves and finally joins her family at the inn, where she shows everyone the notebook of girls holding hands, calling it her letter to the world, and comes out. Ivy ends up showing her artwork at Resilient Helenwood, a gallery with art students addressing the terrible storm that had happened. At the gallery, June and Taryn apologize to her. 1 year later, the 3 friends are as tight as ever. Ivy is out to her family, her house has been rebuilt, and of course she has written a graphic memoir, her letter to the world.
What is your impression of the book?
I really like this book. I love action, suspense, and a good conflict in stories. And middle school realistic fiction reads don't always have that. This book was really fulfilling. The big tornado and Ivy losing her house provided some great conflict. While unfortunate, it made for a great story. Ivy struggling with her sexual orientation and trying to find the courage to come out is something that millions of middle schoolers around the world go through. And Ivy's missing notebook coming back in pages with anonymous notes clipped to them was the perfect touch of mystery. Zooming into the actual text of the book, the imagery was wonderful, and I definitely think I was able to imagine this book in images and not words. I would say that this book would be great for grades 5 to 7, and I think that I would probably enjoy this book the most at 5th or early 6th grade. This book was intended for grade 7. I don't think that it really should be that. I did notice as the book progressed that the words gay and lesbian aren't at all used, except when Robin says that her girlfriend, a minor character in the book, is bisexual. When Ivy comes out, she only says that she likes girls, not that she is a lesbian, and never really specifies her orientation, her sexual orientation. While reading about Ashley Herring Blake, the author of this book, I found out that she herself is openly bisexual, and I wonder if she may have only felt comfortable writing about the sexuality that she probably knows the best about.
What lessons did you draw from the book?
We see a lot of the same lessons in middle school LGBTQ plus reads. To stay true to yourself, find your allies, and that it's okay to be different.
Tula, thank you.
Of course.
If you know of other contested books in MCPS or in another school district or public library, and you want them reviewed, or know students who might be willing to review books on air, please reach out at producer@ihppod.org. On August 9th, the United States District Court in Greenbelt, Maryland, heard arguments for and against an injunction on MCPS's LGBTQ books. The plaintiffs are suing the school district to allow families to opt out of reading certain LGBTQ plus books. MCPS says no one is exempt from the curriculum. There is a Maryland law that allows families to opt out of family life and human sexuality curriculum. And initially, advocates of the opt-out had said that the new LGBTQ plus books were an extension of this family life and human sexuality curriculum. On August 9th, however, lawyers for the Beckett Fund, a conservative religious liberty law firm representing the plaintiffs, instead argued for the First Amendment freedoms of families not to participate in teaching and learning that goes against their religion. The argument is in line with recent victories conservatives have won on behalf of vendors, a baker and a wedding website designer who refuse to do business with gay couples. We will be following the opt-out case against MCPS very closely. If the plaintiffs lose, the case will likely be appealed. If MCPS loses, they face a difficult and different decision. Would an appeal open the door to the case going to the Supreme Court, where the conservative majority would use the case to set a nationwide precedent against having LGBTQ plus books in public schools? Politically, the demand for the opt-out, coming mainly from immigrant Muslim and Ethiopian Orthodox groups, have opened a gap in the big tent politics of Democrats in a deeply blue jurisdiction. In Virginia, this opening gave rise to Glenn Youngkin and his ultimate victory as governor. I'll be back with Maryland's People's Counsel, David Lapp. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. David Lapp, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
As the People's Council of Maryland, you filed a petition in front of the Public Service Commission earlier this year, requesting priority action for long-term planning for Maryland gas companies.
Gas utilities make their decisions, they make proposals and invest in billions of dollars in fossil fuel infrastructure, and that gets approved by the state sort of on a case-by-case, asset-by-asset basis. So you have long-term investments being made in infrastructure that is very likely to become obsolete. And because they're a monopoly, they have some assurance that at least some of those costs, if not all of those costs, will be recovered either from customers or from the public going forward, even if those assets are not useful for serving customers. We know that the use of gas, that how much gas is being used, it must decline not just a little bit, but substantially, probably close to 100%, if not 100%. Even Baltimore Gas and Electric, the state's largest gas utility, acknowledges in a report that those reductions will be at least 60%.
You're asking gas companies or companies that own gas businesses that they have to plan for their own end based on climate action goal.
I don't want to say they must plan for their own demise completely. They must plan for the demise of delivery of fossil gas. The gas utilities, they are in the business of delivery. They are not in the commodity business. They do procure for customers the commodity, but they are largely indifferent to how much gas is actually delivered over their pipes. Where they earn money for their investors is through the physical infrastructure that they build, their capital spending. That's how they earn their money. So if they can invest in these fossil fuel assets and related capital expenditures to support that delivery system, their investors are happy, even if gas consumption itself drops substantially. Maryland is it's called a restructured state where the commodity is sold separately from the delivery portion. So if you look at your gas bill is going to have delivery charges and it's going to have commodity charges. Now, some of your delivery charges are based on on how much commodity you are purchasing.
Right.
But that's just the way that it's paid for. So if you consume 100 therms of gas in a month, you're going to pay a commodity price for that 100 therms, and then you're going to pay a delivery price, which is calculated in part based on your use of 100 therms. But the gas company itself, it wants that infrastructure because that goes into the rate base upon which its utility investors earn a return.
Okay, got it. So because we separate distribution and the actual sale of the commodity of gas, right? Because we separate those two, and utility companies are only in the business of delivery. So even if we use no gas, right, we would still be paying them. How is that possible? If we use no gas, say I stop using gas, I don't have to pay any delivery charge, no matter if they have a gas line coming to my house. Or are you saying that that's not, that I still have to pay even if I use no gas?
say you're a Washington Gas customer or a BGE customer, and you remain a customer, and it just so happens that you use zero gas in a month, you're still going to pay some charges. You're going to pay there's still sort of a fixed element, a customer charge. It's going to be relatively small. If you are a Washington Gas customer and you leave and you say, I don't want to be on Washington Gas anymore, I've electrified my home. In that case, you're paying zero.
In that case, is Washington Gas or BG&E or the gas companies, right? Are they left holding the bag for their investment, or are they simply changing their rate so that, others that have not cut the gas will continue to pay for it?
They continue to collect all those fixed costs from the other customers. So what is going on now is that we have massive fossil fuel investments going on in the state. And those investments are occurring at an accelerated rate, and it's increasing the size of the rate base faster than assets are being depreciated out of the rate base. And so rates have to go up. Ratepayers pay for the taxes to keep the utilities rate of return where it's set by regulators, and it's going to be in the neighborhood of 9%. We have calculated that the utilities from now until year 2100, they're going to spend $34.5 billion. But customers over that time through 2100 will have paid over $125 billion for that. That's the full cost.
I want to point out BG&E stands for Baltimore Gas and Electric. It has a gas business and an electric business. Those are separately subject to different kinds of laws and rates of returns and different rate bases. And even if their gas business were to terminate at some point based on climate change goals, that they will continue to have their electric business, I would assume that in fact, that the gas business would move on, would shift to electric, growing it further. Okay, so let me ask you this question. If gas companies are betting that people will continue to consume gas more and more, and they're making all these investments leading to essentially an increase in what consumers pay for gas in terms of distribution costs, right? Will we come to a point where consumers will decide that gas is too expensive, and in fact, I will cut off my gas? And then once a few customers cut off their gas, stop being customers at all, pay no fixed charge, then we are left with a shrinking customer base for the gas part of the business. And because we are now applying the same rate to a smaller number of people, the rates are even higher. So in fact, there's an accelerated increase in the rate, leading further to loss of customers and move away, right? So in fact, are they digging their own grave?
Because they are regulated monopolies, when they make these investments and they're approved by the Public Service Commission, they are endowed with a legal argument that they should continue to be entitled to recover at least some of that money, even if those pipes are no longer used.
Theoretically, a gas company that has already made a bunch of investments, if it were to lose every customer it had, how would they recover their rate of return? Because there is no customer now. Is the state then in debt for it?
There are legal theories under which the state should not be responsible for those costs.
Right.
At the same time, there is law there are arguments to be made, and they're based essentially on the Constitution, on the takings clause of the Constitution, that the utility is entitled to at least some of that money.
I understand they feel they are entitled, but I don't understand entitled from whom.
That really is the question. If all the customers are gone, who are they collecting it from?
Can they then demand from the state of Maryland, please pay up state of Maryland, or what? What can they do? Or is this, just legal ground that has not ever been tested? We don't know.
There is a history back when states were enacting statutes on retail competition. There were concerns about generation plants that were uneconomic and that would not be competitive in the market with retail competition. So states did different things to securitize. They would issue bonds to pay off those generation plants.
That means that the state of Maryland has to take positive steps in order to take on that responsibility. That responsibility doesn't quite exist in law just yet. But when push comes to shove and we are faced with this emergency of these companies, say, theoretically not having any customers, but having this huge asset base that the shareholders are upset, and then they can lobby with the state government to bail them out, essentially. And that may happen because obviously they are politically powerful. Is that the basic play out of this?
That's the scenario that I think is probably most likely.
If the customer base shrinks, truly does, then I'd imagine that gas prices, the commodity gas prices, would fall through the floor. So that masking effect you will continue to see for a long time.
Our gas spending report from October of last year, we have a couple of graphs in the last part of that report that show the volatility in gas prices. And I don't think we're going to get away from that volatility. So there may be periods of low prices and there will be periods of high prices like we saw about 12 months or 16 months ago.
I think we established the scope of the problem now. In your petition, you're asking exactly what from the Public Service Commission?
We need to stop subsidizing new gas customers. A new house is built. Depending on where that house is built, it's going to be so far away from a gas main. So there's a cost to extending a service line from wherever that gas main is to the new house. And in many, many cases, that's done for free. There can be a customer cost to it. There's essentially a calculation done depending on how far away and what the costs are.
Existing customers are bearing the burden for expansion, and you want to break that. How do you break it?
Well, you address the gas line extension policy. We're asking the Public Service Commission as part of our petition to stop that subsidy by existing customers for new customers.
Okay, so the new customer will have to pay for the entire thing, or the gas company will have to eat it?
We are asking the commission to engage in a process by which we make that determination. The better option would be for Maryland. This is what Montgomery County is moving towards, and it was a consideration in the Climate Solutions Now Act. We know that it's more cost effective for new buildings to be fully electrified. That's the real solution here. But short of that, we should not be incentivizing people to remain to expand the gas system by subsidizing their new connections. Let me give you another example. We have in Maryland utility-run energy efficiency programs. They are overseen by the Public Service Commission, and they are subsidized by ratepayers, and they may do things like support a home energy audit. A lot of, historically, a lot of it has been changing out lighting to more efficient lighting, maybe providing rebates or free light bulbs, that sort of thing, or for you to invest when you replace your furnace, your air conditioner, a more efficient.
Hey, I got one.
Right? Okay, so you've taken advantage of those, as have I. Right now, contrary to state policy, we are incentivizing people to purchase gas appliances. This makes no sense because state policy is about electrification. It makes no sense because we know that continuing the use of fossil gas is inconsistent with the state climate goals.
In terms of long-term planning in your petition, what is your ask?
We need to have a proceeding before the commission so that these decisions that are now being made on a case-by-case basis are made with a long-term goal in mind. So, for example, instead of whether it be Washington Gas or BGE or Columbia, any of the gas utilities in the state, instead of going neighborhood by neighborhood and tearing up all the streets and replacing all this pipe that is going to is built to last 40, 60, 70 years, and that's how long it takes to pay it off. Mm-hmm. We should be looking and say, is that a smart idea to do that? What are the other options?
What would be a mechanism for previewing maintenance work done by gas companies?
So there are, for example, a number of advanced leak detection technologies available. And we should be considering, I should say, whether those technologies can be used to identify problem areas, and then there can be targeted repair or replacement of those pipes without the massive infrastructure spending. What goes into rate base is replacement of infrastructure. If that pipe, instead of being replaced, is repaired, if you identify that there's a leak on that pipe and they go in and repair it, that does not go in the rate base. They have an incentive to say, go out in this street and replace all the services and mains in an area. That's what BGE's Operation Pipeline does, is they're just replacing all that. They're not saying, okay, here's a problem pipe, we can go in and do a targeted repair, right? We think that the capital spending can be moderated through different techniques, such as leak detection and repair. A neighborhood that the utility may be planning on replacing all the pipes in that neighborhood, maybe there should be a longer term option for that neighborhood and to spend that money on supporting electrification of that neighborhood rather than replacing all the pipes. We think these billions of dollars that are being spent on fossil fuel infrastructure, some of that money can just be saved for customers, but some of it can potentially support electrification.
With a company like BG&E, which is Baltimore Gas and Electric, I find it easier to imagine. They have two businesses. They're going to take from one and pass the business into the other. It's not a net loss to the company itself. But a company like Washington Gas that has no electric, they would find it very difficult.
The same investment strategies exist on the electric side as the gas side. So for a company like Baltimore Gas and Electric, the best thing they can do for investors is invest heavily on the electric side in capital infrastructure and invest heavily on the gas side. So it's not, one doesn't necessarily take away from the other unless regulators make, or the legislature makes that a requirement. Right now, Baltimore Gas and Electric has approximately 700,000 gas customers and about 1.3 million, almost twice as many electric customers. So Baltimore Gas and Electric is more of an electric utility than a gas utility. But to put it in perspective, the rate at which they are spending on gas infrastructure, they are spending as much on gas infrastructure as they are on electric infrastructure, about $500 million a year.
I would imagine that in some cases, the Public Service Commission just doesn't have the ability to effectively make these changes, not just to make these changes, but to effectively make these changes. What do you need from the legislature? What's going on there?
Repealing the what's called the STRIDE law, and that's a law that was enacted in 2013 that is intended to accelerate the replacement of existing gas infrastructure. So we have a law on the books that arguably is inconsistent with the Climate Solutions Now Act, which says it's the intent of the legislature to move to an electrified building sector. So we have that law enacted in 2022, the Climate Solutions Now Act, and then we have this 2013 law that says that it's the policy of the state to accelerate gas infrastructure replacement. That STRIDE law is being pointed to by the gas utilities as support for some of this infrastructure. Now, to be clear, the Public Service Commission has discretion to approve or deny STRIDE projects. They have to find those projects are reasonable and prudent, and they have to find rates are just and reasonable. And so we explain in our gas planning petition that the Public Service Commission has authority to slow that down. Now, legislative action would certainly help that situation and provide guidance to the Public Service Commission.
What else do you need from the legislature apart from the STRIDE Act repeal?
New building electrification standards. It's very clear. All the technical analysis show that it's cheaper, more cost effective to build new buildings that operate fully on electricity and not on gas. That was part of the CSNA. The utilities fought back against that, and it got pulled back. We certainly think
CSNA is a Climate Solutions Now Act.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you think? What do you think was the resistance to building electrification provisions in the Climate Solutions Now Act? Why did it fail, essentially?
Ultimately, I think it failed because the utilities opposed that provision of the act because they want to maintain their gas systems. Ultimately, they argued that the electric system isn't ready for broad electrification.
When you set up a monopoly system, right, you're going to get some of these imbalances. Building a competitive market in things like utility has these really big unintended consequences that we don't often realize. That in fact, sometimes we have to accept the inefficiencies of a monopoly over the inefficiencies of the market.
Effective regulation can do a really good job. I don't think that we've had very effective regulation of our utilities in Maryland. It also requires effective regulation at the federal level. 60% of your electric bill is as a result of charges that are approved not by the state, regulators, but by federal regulators. And we need to watch for monopoly creep, right? Monopoly creep is, the utilities are always, they're looking for, they're a business and you can't blame them, but they're looking for new opportunities to expand their monopolies into areas where it might be competitive. Electric vehicle charging is one good example. Like electric utilities would love to have ratepayers support their charging stations, right? Because they can outcompete ChargePoint and Electrify America, these other companies, right? If they can go in with ratepayer backing, they can outcompete them. So we're always going to be looking at monopolies, looking to expand that monopoly a little bit more. It's a natural consequence of the market structure that we have.
You said that Maryland regulation has not been effective. Why?
Why? There's probably a long list of reasons why. I mean, how has it not been effective? An example is the utility multi-year rate proceedings that we're having for Baltimore Gas and Electric and Potomac Electric Pepco. Those multi-year rate proceedings, they serve really, from our perspective, one primary purpose. They move risk away from shareholders onto customers. They encourage utilities to dream up of major capital spending that they can do and there's no consequence if the commission says, no, we reject that. You don't really need to do that. Whereas with standard rate making practices, there is some risk, there's some moral hazard on the part of the electric utilities. They're not going to invest in capital unless they're pretty certain that capital is going to be useful in serving customers. With these multi-year rate plans, that's not the case. That's one example.
In your view, which state has perhaps the most balanced utility law?
A lot of state laws are the same. I think the difference often comes down to how effective their state regulatory commissions are. Until more recently, as we've had a public service commission that has largely been deferential to the utilities. And we think that the Public Service Commission, its charge is to represent and push the utilities to operate in the public interest. And that's because the utilities have a private interest. They have fiduciary obligations to their investors, and those fiduciary obligations are met by maximizing their capital expenditures. And so that's what we see from the utilities when they're promoting, they may say they're promoting efforts to help Maryland meet its climate goals. That may partially be true, but they're going to do that in a way that maximizes their capital investment because that's what their investors earn a return on. So that's why we need effective regulation, because that's what the law essentially recognizes, is that left to their own, utilities are going to operate in the interest of their investors, their private interest. And the law says, no, the utilities are to be regulated by the Public Service Commission to operate in the public interest. That's why we need regulation, and that's why it needs to be effective.
David Lapp, thank you for taking the time to come on I Hate Politics and explain a really complex matter.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. What lessons should we draw from my conversation with Maryland People's Counsel David Lapp? First, it is a case of two unreconciled laws. Two goods faced off against each other. A 10-year-old law that encourages gas companies to replace, not repair, its pipeline network, adding billions to the rate base, which expands the return that utility shareholders get, against the 2022 Climate Solutions Now Act, which sets ambitious goals for reducing fossil fuel use in the state. Gas utilities such as BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric, the state's largest utility, is spending $500 million a year in strengthening, securing, and expanding its gas network, even as the state is calling for statewide electrification. Someone is going to be left holding the bag. First, it will be gas customers, those without the means to electrify, who will continue using their old water heaters and HVACs. Second, it will be the state and taxpayers. Utilities are politically powerful to secure themselves a bailout. The state's Public Service Commission is responsible for regulating utilities, including gas companies. The commission specifically allows additions to a utility's rate base, determining which capital expenditure projects are necessary and which are not. Utilities themselves are a business with fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. From their point of view, if they can shift repair to replacement, shift operating expenses to capital spending, that's what they will do. And in the past, this would have been a good thing because it would have improved the safety of the gas distribution network. But now that this business must sunset, who will pay? The Public Service Commission was dominated by Republican Governor Larry Hogan's appointees for a number of years. And now, like the state government, the Public Service Commission is turning over and will include a giant of State House and Montgomery County politics, Kumar Barve. The new chair of the commission is going to be David Lapp's former deputy. It could be a new world, but even an enlightened Public Service Commission is going to require legislative support. It is unclear to me at this time that this legislative support exists, or if there is another law to try to fix these matters, we will not still leave a door open for the utilities. There is a larger philosophical question to ponder. How do you plan for the death of an industry? It can come to you as exogenous shock. You deal with it. Some lose, and you put it to chance and look to the future. But if you are responsible for killing an entire line of business that for all practical purposes continues to be profitable, well, that's a wholly different problem. And when you do that, you make political enemies. Hardly surprising that the fossil fuel industry overwhelmingly supports Republicans who don't want to kill it. And from there, how far is it to deny climate change itself? That's all for this episode. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Seth Keibel, a longtime Baltimore area musician. The songs used in this episode come from his compositions in the album Clown with a Stick. Harry Appleman on piano, Jeff Reed on double bass, Joey Antico on drums, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.